Hello, everyone. Hope you've been enjoying the course content so far. In today's topic, I will show you how to navigate your way through two sets of exercises for association mining. First things first, you will see both exercises on Rattle here. One is the basics, and the second one is the extended activities. In the first activity, it will take you through understanding the data. So there are some questions on there, understanding the data, um, plotting frequencies, and also generating association rules. In the second one, you have to pretty much do the same, except you will also be introduced to some common data pre-processing activities or techniques, such as data imputation and also data conversion. In the first activity, we are going to be using the DVD transaction CSV file. And in the second one, we were going to be using the audit CSV file. You will also have access to a reference material or reference guide, which essentially helps you with setting up in Rattle in terms of association mining activities. So if you want to open or start Rattle, we will start R, type library Rattle, and then Rattle, and you will have access to Rattle. Some of you have already seen this in previous weeks, but this is essentially the Rattle environment that we are going to be doing the exercises in this week's week. Now, the first thing that you need to know is how to load data into Rattle. So there are two techniques. I'm going to leave the second technique for you to read and for you to try. But essentially, the easiest option is to use the inbuilt or the built-in data set within Rattle. So how to do that? Essentially, you click execute. It will ask you whether you want to use an example data set, which in this case is the weather data set, and you'll say yes, and it'll load the data set, the weather data set. Now, once the weather data set is loaded, like I said earlier, you're going to be needing the DVD transaction and also the audit data set. So you click on the file name and you will have all the data sets here for you. So for the first set of activities, you're going to be using the DVD transaction and you click execute, and there you go, you've got the data. And in the second set of activities, you need the audit data set, and there you go, here's the audit data set. Now going back to the DVD transaction, you will see that you've got essentially two variables. The first one being the ID and the second one being the item. The first one is the numeric and the second one is categorical variable. If you want to know more about the data itself, you have the option to click view. So to do that, you need to click both as input and execute and then view, and you will be able to see the information about the data set. So you've got the ID and you also have the item or the categories, which in this case are obviously the movies, the name of the movies. Now, if you want to look at the, or if you want to know more about the data, essentially you've got the Explore tab. And in the Explore tab, you've got obviously a bunch of metrics that you can look at and you can play around with. But for now, I'm just going to look at the summary, the description, and also the basics of the data set. And once I click execute, I will have information about my data sets, including okay, the variables or the items in the data set. I have the basic stats such as the minimum, the maximum, the first quartile, and the third quartile, along with the median and mean. I also have more information and more description about my data set, okay? Or basic statistics as well in terms of the numerical value for each variable in my data set. This is obviously going to be different for the audit data set. If I click on the audit data set, I will have a different, obviously, summary. I will have a different description and I will have a different basic statistics. So I've got the employment variable, for example, the education, the marital, the occupation, the gender, and the rest of them. And you will have more information again. And one thing that is interesting is once you're going through the data, you will see that some of the variables, for example, occupation has about 81, for example, missing values, or there's actually more, because I will talk about this in a second. There's actually more missing values. And the reason for that is because we are actually partitioning the data. If we unclick the partitioning and if I execute, you will see that the number of missing values will be more. So occupation now has 101 missing values. So the reason for partitioning, and remember for the rest of the exercises, we'll have to make sure that the partition box is unticked. This is essentially, we're going to talk about this in future weeks, but partitioning the data will allow us for training some of the models, some of the data mining models or machine learning models that we are going to do in future weeks. And very briefly, it means that 70% will be used for training, 15% will be used for validation, and another 15% is used for testing. So we are not going to be worried about that at this stage. So anyway, so this is a very good way before starting your processing, before doing your transformations, before doing your associations or association mining. It's always good practice to have a look at the data and exploring the data first. How many missing values? What is the type of the variable? How many categorical values we have, or how many attributes we have, and the rest of it. Again, we were going to talk about this in more details, in much more detail during our lab. So this is essentially exploring the data. And again, there's a bunch of questions on this, which we will talk about in the lab. In terms of association mining, or in terms of executing a priori algorithm for frequent item set mining, you will go back, and I'm gonna try this with DVD trans, and then I will try this with audit dataset. So you will see that you've got the associate tab. You click on it, right? And you will be able to run association mining. But before doing that, you will see that for single attribute, which is the case for DVD transactions, for single attribute, the items, right? You have to use the first technique. Okay, so method A for association of a single attribute. Essentially what this means is you have to select one variable, in this case ID, as identifier, and then the second item or the second variable as the target variable. We'll talk about this in lab, but you also need to make sure that you click on the baskets. This is for single attribute variables, okay? Or single attribute data set. Now, if I execute, I will have obviously my association mining. And if I click on frequency plot, I will have my the frequency of my association. Now, I want to show you something. So with the frequency plot, you will see that there is obviously some of the variables. And I already mentioned this, you need to make sure that the partition box is unticked. So I've got the frequency of some of the variables, but if I go back and if I unclick the partition and execute, you will see that I'm going to have a different frequency plot. And this is what I meant by using 100% of the data versus 70% of the data. So this is the accurate one. This is the one that we want for our association mining activities. So this is how you generate a frequency plot. Again, there's a bunch of questions on this. If you want to show the rules, you click on showing rules, and these are your rules, all rules, including 117 of them, actually. There's 117 rules. And another thing that you need to know is obviously it's sorted by support level. So it's in a descending order, but it lists all the rules that have higher support first. And this is because we are sorting our results by support. You can sort the results by confidence or by lift. Speaking of support, confidence, and lift, you also have other parameters that you can sort of tune or fine tune your model or fine tune your association mining activity, which we will talk about during the lab. And finally, you can also click plot, and you will be able to see the variables based on their support and their rules, their respective rules. okay, or their associations between each variable. If you want to do the same for the audit data set, you will see that the audit data set is a multi-valued attribute, or it's got multiple attributes. So for this one, again, untick the partition, click execute, go to associate. Now for this one, because it's multiple attributes, we need to untick the baskets. And once we execute, we can generate the frequency plot. We can generate rules. Obviously, we're going to have different rules, and we're going to also generate the rules or plot the rules, and these are going to be our main associations. Okay. So this is all going to be in relation to understanding the data, in terms of exploring the data, plotting frequencies, and also doing some basic association mining. Now, the second thing the final thing that I want to talk about is about data imputation and data transformation through changing numerical attributes to categorical variable. So remember, I already mentioned that once you're looking at exploring the data, there was, for example, occupation in the second data set that had about 101 missing values. So this is going to obviously bias the results, because you've got 101 variables or 101 missing values that are going to obviously impact the results of your models. So how to deal with them is a function of transforming those variables. So for this one, one of the common, perhaps the most common technique to deal with missing values is to impute them, right? So you will see the type of transformation. So we've got rescale, impute, recode, and cleanup. And we also have the mathematical function that is being used that will be used to change or transform the data. So for this one, we're going to be using impute. And in this case, we know that occupation has about 101 missing values. So for this one, we are going to change, or we are going to pretty much transform all the missing values from pretty much nothing into another variable, such as missing. So in this case, we are going to add another category. Again, just like other examples earlier, we will talk about this more during our lab. And then, so we change the missing values to from nothing to a constant such as missing, and then we will click on the occupation and we will execute, and it will be changed. So those 101 missing values will be changed. The second one is, or the second transformation is changing numerical attributes to categorical attributes. And the reason for that is because, again, association mining only works over categorical or nominal attributes. So for instance, we look at our data and we'll see there's a bunch of variables that are numerical. So we want to change them. And how to do that? We are going to be using, again, under transform tab, we are going to be using the age, and you're going to use the recode actually to change from numeric into categoric. Now, there is more information in the questions, which we'll talk about in the lab, but essentially you can change the parameter, and you need to change, for example, age from numeric variable into a categorical variable with 6 categories, okay? And there's a bunch of questions. There's some questions that you have to answer. So we'll change that, for example, to 6, and we're going to change it as categoric, and we will change that, okay? So again, we'll talk about this more in the lab, and we'll talk about some of the, I guess, basic concepts or underlying concepts, the algorithm that will be used in much more detail in the lab. Please have a go at the exercises. If you have any questions, write them down and bring them to the lab. That's it from me for now. I will try and see you in the next one. Thank you.